Hey everyone, welcome back to Uplift Equine Classical Solutions. Today we're going to be talking about the canter. So first we're going to be defining what is the canter. Then we're going to be exploring what are stretching, working, lengthened, medium, collected, extended, and school canters. What are those? Problems that can happen, such as transitioning into the canter and other things. Training the canter. How do you get a horse that doesn't know how to canter under saddle or has never done it to do it in the first place? And we're going to be going over a checklist on that and readiness for the canter checklist, which I will later post on my Patreon for free. You guys can, and not just for members, but for anybody who goes and checks out my Patreon, we will have a readiness for the canter checklist on there. And how transitions improve the canter, so how transitions in and out of the canter actually improve the canter over time. What does the thoracic sling have to do with it? So how does the thoracic sling help the canter? What's the function of it in that gait? And how do you know when the horse is actually using their thoracic sling? And your thigh and hip movement action and how it can change how the canter works and how the thoracic sling behaves. Alright, according to Google, a canter is a controlled 3-beat gait that horses use to move at speed between a trot and a gallop. It's a natural gait for a horse that's faster than a trot, but slower than a gallop, with a speed that can range from 10 to 17 miles per hour and depending on the horse's stride length. Stretching canter is, at least in my training program, the first type of canter that I want the horse to transition into, at least under saddle. It's first trained on the lunge between the trot and transitioning into the canter. Naturally, the horse is going to want to pop his head up and then just run into the canter like they may do in the field. That's only natural for them, and that's why they start out on a lunge line with 0 riders. This helps prevent injuries, and it helps get the horse to understand to relax at the canter and not feel threatened when they are going into the canter. A stretching canter is like a stretching trot, but canter format, so the horse is stretching forward down with their head, and they are lifting their back up with their core muscles, and they are staying in that position whilst cantering around. So that is the stretching canter. That gets the nuchal ligament engaged and moving. So it helps prepare the horse for carrying action. The working canter is when you bring the horse up from a stretching canter. It gets their collected muscles somewhat working a little bit, so hence the name working canter. It's a very good in-between gait for, quote, working. When you're riding it, it's the average, somewhat mildly collected canter that you will experience on a horse when they're doing it correctly. What a working canter is not, it is not just whatever canter the horse decides to offer you at the time. The horse's head is not up and looking around. The horse is using their body and nuchal ligaments and their core to lift you and carry you properly, but they are no longer in a stretching gait. They're now working more of their collection muscles. A lengthened canter is the opposite. So a lengthened canter comes from a stretching canter and a working canter. So you've got the stretching canter down, you've got the working canter down. So what you want to do is allow the horse to stretch forward down a little bit more, not much, because you don't want to lose that working collection. So the working collection you want to use to burst yourself forward in a more lengthened stride. You want to allow the horse to go into a lengthened stride by opening out your body and opening up the distance between their neck. You will allow them to stretch a little bit forward down, not completely, but a little bit farther forward to allow them to lengthen their body as well as their stride. A medium canter is even a little bit longer than that. So they have been practicing lengthening their canter from a working canter to a lengthened canter. And then the medium canter is lengthening it out even more. So they're even more lengthened, it's even more impressive, and they're pushing from the back even more. And sometimes when you have collection down correctly, they actually start lifting up a little bit. So that medium canter will feel like the horse is launching you forward a little bit more than, say, in a regular canter stride. So you've got the horse using their hips, launching themselves forward with you on their back, so it might feel like you're coming up a little bit and more forward, and that's okay. With the extended canter, that is the most extreme version of allowing them to extend their body forward and collected, so forward and upward. You don't want just upward, and you don't want to just allow them to go into a forward down gait. You want them to go forward and upward. So it can be some horses extended canter, say like Glemmerdale or Everdale. I can never remember the name. They both look very similar. Please don't punish me for not knowing that. You've got the horse, that horse has such a extreme extended canter that is, in my opinion, amazing, which is great, and that's why I featured a picture of it in this video. But that extended canter has to be as collected, as upward, and as forward as the horse is physically capable of. This is why you work up to it, because it takes a lot of muscle and a lot of endurance to get the horse to that place. The collected canter is a combination of when the working canter comes more underneath of itself, so more collection plus more upward impulsion. So the impulsion, instead of going forward straight, it is now coming up. So as you ride a collected canter, you will feel a more uphill movement or an upward movement as the hind legs come more underneath of the horse and pushing the horse forward and upward. So sometimes this is a little bit jarring for some people, and commonly when a rider will ask or accidentally ask for a collected canter or a collection in the canter, when the horse comes more up and the rider feels a more upward movement, they feel like the horse is about to rear sometimes, depending on how upward the movement becomes. So sometimes this can be a little bit jarring, and if you have a good reputable coach and instructor, this will help you out so that they have an eye on the ground and they can tell you whether or not the movement is correct. Now the school canter is something that, unless you're in the more classical academic type circles, you're likely not going to hear of it, and that is the very collected canter. So more collected than the very collected canter. So the horse is so collected that the groundwork person and the trainer can look at things, can walk alongside of them, and tweak little things here and there and make transitions in between those gaits. It is a very good exercise for the horse. It allows them to prepare for some of the more advanced things like in high school. So the jumps that you see, say, in the Spanish riding school, as well as the levade and things like that. So that's what the school canter is used for. The first problem that I think of when I think of problems in the canter is cross-firing. So cross-firing is when you have one lead happening in the front of the horse and the opposite lead happening in the back of the horse. Not only is it awkward to ride, but if you try to ride that around a corner, it can be potentially dangerous. So we don't want a crossfire to happen. A crossfire is when the horse is not balanced enough and not mentally collected enough to really give you a quality canter. This happens much of the time when they are rushed into a canter, or they rush themselves into a canter because they are in a stressed environment or in a stressed mindset. The other thing that can happen is if there's something physically wrong in their lumbar region. Most often is if they have an SI issue or a hip issue, that prevents them from easily going into one lead with the back end of them. So you could see they go easily, say to the right, and you have an easy canter going to the right, but then when you try to go to the left, they crossfire all the time. That can be a physical issue that should be addressed by one of your body worker teams in vet. So the horse cannot go straight. Now this is a straightness issue that should be addressed at the trot, but if the horse goes into the canter or is chased into the canter and the one side of their body isn't as strong as the other side of their body, then they will drift. If you think of a horse pushing unevenly, so their weaker side's not pushing as far as their stronger side, and their stronger side is pushing farther, and they're trying to carry you, they will go towards the weaker side. So the stronger side is going to be pushing them away to the weaker side. So if the horse does not go in a straight line, just starts drifting on a diagonal, when you ask them for the canter, you can see that there's an issue. Cannot stay in the canter, so cannot sustain many strides in the canter. So they go 1 or 2 strides and then they just quit. So that can be a physical training issue. So spend more time on the lunge line. That's why I physically train my horses on the lunge line, and when I'm developing their stretching canter, they're also developing their wind and they're developing their muscles so that they can stay in that canter training. If the horse cannot sustain a canter for a reasonable amount of time, you've got an issue and then you have to go back to the drawing board. Another issue that can happen is falling on the forehand into the circle. So a lot of riders get into this because they are not taught good positioning in the saddle to help the horse go around a corner. But falling on the forehand first is when the horse's thoracic sling drops. So when the horse's thoracic sling is either too weak or the horse never was taught or figured out how to lift its own sling and carry you and itself, then the horse will have issue going and bending around a circle or bending, period. What their inside shoulder will do is also drop. So as this drops and this drops, they will start drifting inside the circle, so usually towards the lead leg, because they're starting to try to catch themselves. So they dropped everything, they're starting to have a panic attack basically, and in that they stopped paying attention to their balance, they stopped being capable of balancing, and now they're falling. So that's why it's called falling on the forehand or falling into the circle, because now they are tripping, basically starting to trip over themselves and still trying to carry you at the same time. So they fall into the circle, and until the rider stops all of that from happening and reevaluates what is going on, this can have basically a stacking result where you just keep going down and down and down, and things keep getting worse and worse and worse until somebody stops it. Tripping. Tripping can happen when a horse drops its thoracic sling and stops paying attention, or is not strong enough. So when the horse is not strong enough, they stop lifting their legs as much, they start tripping over things. They will start tripping over their own feet if there is a lameness, a strength issue, or a balance issue. Training the canter. How do you get a new horse or a horse that you are restarting from trotting to cantering? First, train the transition. Train going between a trot and a canter. So horses, they know their bodies, they know their gaits, they know their stride. If you've seen them run around like a maniac in their field, then you know that they know how to canter, at least when they initiate the canter. So it's less about whether or not they actually know how to do it. How do we get them to respond to us initiating it? So first, you've got all of your groundwork going on, you've got your walk and trot transition, so the horse knows when you initiate a walk to trot transition or a halt to walk transition, or even if you want to do a skip gait from halt to trot. When you are initiating something, they understand to respond. So since you have started that precedence, this part should be somewhat easy. So either at liberty in a round pen or a reasonably small-ish arena, medium-sized arena, or on the lunge line, you can initiate that transition. So if you've got them on the lunge, you do your walk to trot transitions consistently. So you're going to, if you follow this, you're going to look like a idiot trying to do this. I've got laughed at so many times, but this avoids the horse from getting smacked by the lunge whip or getting threatened by the lunge whip. And it's kind of fun doing it. It's a relationship thing. They start mimicking you. So if they have mimicked you in the trot and the walk and they watch you transition yourself into a walk or, human trot transition and they follow you, what you want to start doing is kind of this weird canter thing with your body. So you start doing the canter cadence with your legs on the lunge or at liberty, and you kind of just keep clocking, the thing that you've asked them to do from the walk to the trot, you start clucking into the canter and doing the canter stride. So they see you doing the canter stride, and typically many of them will follow you right into it. So then you capture that, you stop, they stop, you reward them, you say good job, and then you do it again. And then you do it again and again. And you put that to a word. There are other things that you can do if the horse is deaf. We have worked with deaf horses before, but typically when the horse is deaf, they can also see you. Put it to a word or put it to a sound so that they know to go from trot to canter during that time, and then you don't always have to look like an idiot trying to canter stride yourself into them canter striding themselves. So now I know, unpopular opinion, a lot of people are going to give me a lot of flack for that and make fun of me completely. Do not worry, I am used to being made fun of. It's okay. But so that's how you kindly transition the horse from the trot to canter, either at liberty or on the lunge. That is the training the transition. So you train the transition so that they canter on command. After you've rewarded them for just cantering period, you start rewarding them for relaxing. So they lower their head, they start relaxing, you capture that. You put that to a command. You put that to a half halt on the lunge line. Then they're lowering their head when you half halt on the lunge line. You are also physically training them to canter period. So you got them into the canter period. You start training the capture. You capture their head lowering into the stretching canter. With their head naturally lowering on their own volition, they are then going to use their body a little bit more effectively as opposed to if you were to force it down with side reins. If they can balance themselves stretching whilst on a circle on the lunge, then, in my opinion, I think they're ready to start trying that under saddle. You need to be able to ride this canter. So riding the canter is kind of like riding a wave. You've got the horse coming up, coming back, and then coming forward and down. So up, back, forward, down. And in order to sit the canter, you need to be able to sit the trot first, because you have to be able to sit the trot to canter transition. You go in there, you post for a few strides, you sit for a couple strides, you post for a few strides, and then the amount of strides that you sit increases more and more and more as your own core strength increases and is still able to ride that sitting trot while the horse is still carrying you with their thoracic sling in the engaged position. If you don't ride the trot well and you just start bouncing around in the saddle, the horse will disengage their thoracic sling. It's a natural thing. It's a bracing against your brace. So if you're hard to carry, they're going to be hard to ride. So once you can sit the trot, you can sit the trot to canter transition. So your first trot to canter transition, ideally you could have a helper. You're on the lunge line. You're sitting on your horse. You know how to sit that transition, and then your lunge line person will ask them to go into a canter on a very large circle, as large as you can get it, and you just ride through that transition. That is the easiest way to do it because the horse has been being lunged this whole time, and then you get on, and the only element of change that is there is the fact that you are sitting on their back. So that is the easiest way. Now, if you don't have a helper, and sometimes that happens, the best way to go about doing that is try to choose a day where they have a little bit more energy than usual. Do your normal routine, do your trot thing. Try to find more energy at the trot, kind of put in a little bit more energy, and also put in that hip movement for the canter. So you go into the canter with a little bit more energy, you give that voice command that you have instilled, and you ask them to go forward at the canter. You want to have a couple of strides in the canter and then reward them. But that's when you end your riding session. That first transition into the canter, end the riding session there. You can always ask for more later. Don't ask, they're not sure if they gave the right thing and then keep asking for more. That is only going to frustrate them and confuse them. So that's where you end your training session if that's your first transition. And even when you are restarting your horse, your aids and your intensity of aids may and will probably be different than when they were first trained. So if you're restarting a horse and you are giving them the correct aids, they may not have originally had the correct aids or have had way too intense of aids to get them into the canter. So you want to reward them when they do good. First, can I steer and stay balanced at the trot? So is my trot straight? Can I go around a circle without falling into the circle? And can I go around at a stretching trot without my horse popping its head up, looking around, and not carrying me properly? So can I steer, stay balanced at the trot, stay relaxed at the trot? Can I achieve a real stretching trot? So already going into that, can I steer and stay balanced? Can I achieve an actual stretching trot? So not something where my horse just brings his head down. So that can be, a variation of that can be what's called LDR, so low, deep, round, which means the horse is just bringing their head down, they're behind the vertical. The rider's widening their hands out to kind of give that horse the headset signal, basically. That's not what I'm talking about. So a real stretching trot is forward down, they're lifting their back, and they have that floaty stride that when you actually ride that floaty trot stride, it feels like you are riding a cloud. It is so easy to sit, it is ridiculous when they are truly doing a stretching trot. The third, can I sit the trot? Can my rider sit the trot at all? You cannot go into a good canter until you can sit the trot. You could physically go into a canter if you can't sit the trot, but it's going to be difficult and you're going to have a hard time sitting the canter. Do I, as a rider, have enough core and pelvic floor strength to be able to sit my horse's trot? And is my horse able to give me a quality enough trot to be able to sit in the first place? 4, do I have impulsion at the trot? So do I have enough impulsion with my horse's trot to be able to transition into a canter? So you need to have a good, active, flowy, stretchy trot that has enough impulsion, so push, so not speed, but impulsion. So speed is the miles per hour that you're going. Impulsion is how much push your horse has forward and up. When you start training a horse, it's more forward than up, but it should go into kind of more of a forward up direction as you train the horse. Number 5, does my horse bend around the inside leg? So if I activate my inside leg on the girth, will my horse bend around it? So have I achieved that at the halt and the walk and the trot? If I have not achieved that at the halt, walk, and trot, then there is no point in trying to go to the canter because you're only going to create more problems for yourself if you cannot do that, or if your horse does not know how to do that. How do transitions improve the canter? So once you have achieved the canter and you are training the canter, how do downward and then upward transitions help improve and develop the canter? A horse has the amazing ability to kind of find an equilibrium at a certain speed and be able to do that speed for a long time. Hence endurance riding, and when they're out in the wild, that's how they can go 20 miles without really slowing down too much. But what they have trouble with is upward and downward transitions. That takes work. So just physically training them at one stride, going one speed, is not going to help them after they find that equilibrium. What will help them develop their body is the upward and downward transitions. So once you have the canter, you do your trot transition. You make a pattern. Do a downward trot transition, then you do an upward canter transition. Downward trot, upward canter. Give the horse a purpose, so create a pattern where it is a recognizable place where you're going to do the transition. The horse may start anticipating, but for now, that's okay. You want to switch it up a little bit just so that they don't get bored, you don't get bored, but give them a purpose. Say, okay, we're going to go around the barrel at the trot, but then we're going to shoot off to the canter. Make it predictable enough that they can ready their mind and their body for the transition. So they know the transition that's coming, it's not going to be a surprise. Eventually you can get out of that habit, but at the start you need to be somewhat predictable for them. You've got your pattern, you've got your transition down and up into the trot, and then you want to do what I call a skip gait transition. So you are going to go from a walk to a canter, and that's skipping the trot gait. So that requires more push, more lift, and more jump into the canter. And even a double skip gait transition, which means from halt to canter, that requires even more impulsion and more push. So the more times you do that, so it's more reps, the more muscle that they will gain over time to be able to do that push. You develop your impulsion through upward and downward transitions, because I explained the upward transition. When you go into a downward transition and you do it well, not pulling at their face and they're just lifting their head up, because when you pull at their face and cause pain, they will drop their thoracic sling because now they're focused on the pain. And then they will lose focus on anything else. Then you got the cortisol coming in, and then they stop learning. Because a horse's brain is somewhat simple. And once you got cortisol shooting into there, you have a big issue in learning. You want to control the stress enough that they are just stressed enough that they are still learning, but you're challenging them, but not stressed to the point where they just shut off and stop learning. And that nuance is something that can be taught with a coach. So you want a training coach or a other reputable training coach that can also teach you this. But they also have to be able to recognize this. Once you have that downward transition, which ideally you use your body to help the horse to downward transition with their thoracic sling still lifted. This is more difficult. It's more difficult than going into a higher gait, because you're pushing. To go down out of and go down into a trot or a walk from a canter, it requires the horse to carry themselves on their back end and not fall into their forehand. Horses will naturally tend to just fall on their forehand. You can see them when they're running full bore, they're at the gate because they're going to get fed, and then they start slowing down, and then they do this jump thing, they pop their head up and be like, oh, okay, they're there. They will naturally do that. So it's natural for them to drop themselves onto the ground and onto their forehand as they stop. To prevent this from happening, you need to train the horse to use their back end to help slow themselves down. So that's how transitions improve the canter. What does the thoracic sling have to do with it? So I've been talking about the thoracic sling this entire time. What I haven't done is explain to you what in the world it is. So according to Google, a horse's thoracic sling is a group of muscles, ligaments, tendons, and fascia that connect the horse's forelimbs to its chest and support its weight between the front legs. It's essential for a horse's balance, stability, and movement, allowing it to bend, turn, move forward and sideways, and jump. The thoracic sling also protects the brachial plexus, which is located between the forelimb and the rib cage. This is according to Google, not just me. This is Google. We have the dorsal extensor chain muscles on the top, so the nuchal ligament, which is the dorsal extensor chain of muscles. So there's a ligament, then there's the chain of muscles around that ligament. That helps the horse separate its spine and lift and bend around. It goes from the poll all the way down the tail and all the way down the hamstring. So all of that is working in conjunction. If you have a tight hamstring, it's going to be hard to use that entire dorsal extensor chain of muscles. If you have an issue with the poll, another reason, if you have an issue with the tail or an issue with the shoulder, any part of that chain of muscle, if you have a problem there or a tightness or something, then you're going to have trouble with the rest of it. That's why it all chains together. Now for the bottom portion, this is the part that is connected to the tongue and jaw movement. And this is why it is so important to give the horse the ability to kind of lick and chew and move that jaw around. And that's why I like to have rewards. I'll stop calling them treats because that seems to be very much a trigger word for some people. But we'll do rewards because the company that I order my rewards from calls them rewards. So we'll do that. You offer them something to chew on that can help calm them down a little bit. Now, I don't recommend, the horse is spooking, they're beyond wanting any kind of thing other than safety, and you're just trying to offer this treat, like, hey, here's a treat to kind of get them calmed down. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is that the horse is stressed a little bit, you've challenged them, you've pushed them a little, slightly farther than they should go, but they're still kind of with you. When you feed them something, that's when you got a little bit of a shot of dopamine. That dopamine helps them calm down, come back to you, and refocus. And I'm talking about most horses. There are some select horses that when you have that reward and they're chewing on it, all they want is more of it. This is the minority, not the majority. The minority, you will have to have another tactic. So you sit and you pat them and you try to give them another source of dopamine, such as lowering their head. In this picture, we have the hyoid apparatus. So that is a bone, the hyoid bone. Ours is right here, very similar to where theirs are. Theirs is obviously bigger and it connects differently in their skeleton. But what I can tell you is it protects that squishy part of their neck, and it protects our squishy part of our necks from collapsing, and it helps keep the trachea open. With horses, there is a process of muscles that also helps them swallow, but those muscles are also connected to their sling that helps them lift themselves. They do not have this collarbone to help keep their rib cage in the same spot. So they have this ability to lift and lower their rib cage at will, given they know how to do it at will. Some horses figure it out naturally. Some horses never figure out and they have to be taught. The hyoid apparatus, and I apologize if I don't pronounce this properly, but these are very long sciencey Latin words. Anyway, the hyoid apparatus, the omohyoidosis, or omohyoidus, you can see what it is attached to that. And then what's also attached to that is the sternohyoidus and the sternocephalicus. Those three groups are all connected together, and they are all also connected to the tongue. So if you lock up the tongue, you lock up the hyoid, you lock up these muscles underneath the neck. And you see that this one, the sternocephalicus, is connected to the ventral flexor chain of muscles. Now, we talked about the dorsal extensor chain of muscles, so that is a chain of different muscles working in conjunction together. If you have problems in one area, you're going to have problems all over the place. This is the same as the ventral flexor muscles. It is a chain of muscles that help the horse flex and lift their body. If they have a problem in any one of those areas where you see purple, you have a problem with the entire horse. So if you lock up the tongue, you lock up the ability for them to effectively lift their thorax or their thoracic sling. So we have the thoracic sling, and you can see how using those core muscles will help them lift themselves into a canter. Now in this picture, it shows it a little bit better, the ability for the horse to use the shoulder sling in collection. So collection is the ability to collect their body and lift themselves and carry you as the rider. All right, so that's what the thoracic sling has to do with it. It has everything to do with it. Your thigh and hip. What do they have to do with it? What does your position have to do with good cantering? So in order to allow the horse to come back, lift themselves, and use the thoracic sling effectively, you have to be a good passenger. So in order to be a good passenger, you want your legs to allow them to be able to use that muscle. So if you are able to relax yourself enough and open your legs, so it has more to do with your thighs and your hips, so you can rotate your legs out and allow the horse to come up. If you are rotating your legs in and gripping with your knees, you're actually cutting off the horse's ability to effectively use their body. So that's why when you lean forward and clamp with your legs, the horse will tend to just run faster at the trot or drop their sling and just run fast. That's not using your body effectively. That's not allowing their body to be used effectively, and you're actually cutting off that ability to do that. So that's why you want to turn your legs out, allow them to come under you and forward, and you just relax. The thigh and hip interaction with your horse can make or break your canter transition. So that is everything. That is what was the canter, what are the variations of the canter, problems that can happen with the canter, training the canter. How do you know if your horse is ready for the canter transition? How the canter transition up and down can improve the canter. What does the thoracic sling have to do with it? And how your thigh and hip action and seat can make or break your canter. All right, well, that's it for the very high-level overview of the canter itself. Now, this is not the last time that you will see me mention the canter, because there is much more involved in just more. Well, thank you for joining me for this high-level overview of the canter. Now, this isn't the only time that you're going to see the canter mentioned on this channel, because there is so much more that we can go into. Well, thank you for joining me in this very high-level overview of the canter. Now, this isn't the only time that you will see me mention the canter on this channel, because there's so much more that we can get into. but I didn't have all of the time in the world for this video. I did not want to make it ages and ages long. But thank you for joining me, and I want to thank my patron supporters, both Blake Brandon and Margie Dash, for supporting Uplift Equine in our endeavor to spread the word about the classical method and solutions behind the classical method. So thank you for watching, and please be kind to your horse, be kind to other people, and have a wonderful day and have a wonderful time with your horse.